RideTech Shockwave suspension has shown up. What's up guys, welcome back to Infamous Project. We're back working on Chuck's 1991 GT, and while we're waiting for all the RideTech Air Ride to show up, I have been working on the inside of the car, and it really doesn't look like much because, well, there's pretty much no interior other than the door panels. So if you guys remember on the last episode, I cut out the roll cage, and even though I got the majority of it out, there was a few bits that fought me, and those few bits took just as long as it did for me to get the rest of the cage out, believe it or not. And those bits were down by the B pillars down here. So right down here, because they had it welded to the rocker panel, then obviously down to the floor, so it was really hard to cut down this way, down that way, down that way. And finally managed to get both sides out and then cleaned up all of the areas because there was crossers going down here, and cleaned everything up, got paint on everything. So once we do our Kilmat, you're not even going to notice that those plates are there. Now you'll notice that we are keeping the through floor subframe connectors to keep things reasonably stiff. And again, these still allow for the factory seat tracks to clear. So other than a little bit of a hump in the carpet back there, there's really not too much to worry about. So I vacuumed profusely, trying to get any of the metal shavings and everything else. And guys, I gotta say, Chuck, if you're watching, I know you're watching, you're gonna notice there's actually tons of overspray. So, you know, when they did the cage, and unfortunately they got it down on your rocker panel here. The side skirt's okay. Don't mind this, this is my dirt. But this here, they got overspray on your rocker. You might want to go back to them and be like, guys, what the hell? But anyways, I could probably be all clay barred off. Not a huge deal. And same thing back here. Plates all cleaned up, ground down, painted up, and found like an old battery pack here. I think this was most likely due to the trunk mounted battery, I'm assuming, with a couple holes back here that maybe that was like a keep alive, or making sure that battery didn't go dead, some sort of tender unit. So I'll probably pull that out, as I'm sure after all these years it is no longer in service. So you can see here, there's no insulation, no padding on the firewall, nothing. They gutted everything out of here except for the little bit around the clutch pedal assembly, because they would have just ripped it out without taking this guy right off, which ultimately is fine. I'll leave in there what's there and just Kilmat the rest. Been working on a heater box here, one that I had in my inventory. It was reasonably clean, everything was functional. So we got a new evaporator core here, and just waiting on a new heater core to show up, and then we'll get everything buttoned back up there the way that it should be. And once we got everything Kilmatted and the heater box back in, that can allow us to put in the dash frame and the dash harness, which will be a really good win, because once that's in, then we can bolt in the wheel and column, which means this thing will actually be able to steer. So the timing should be perfect. By the time this thing can steer again, then hopefully the RideTech components will show up. Right now, this is just sitting on the drag shocks all the way down, just trying to give Chuck an idea what it's going to look like when he airs the car down. Of course, the wheels are going to be changed, so they aren't going to be staying on the car because, well, there's only fronts anyways with these Ranger wheels that are in the back. So the name of the game right now, honestly, guys, is Kilmat. So I've got 3 boxes, 8 mil thickness, and gonna do the whole floor, whole firewall, underside of the, well, where the firewall goes up into the cowl panel up there. And then not gonna get crazy and try and do everything behind the rear plastics, but we're definitely gonna cover most of all of the surface areas, just because, again, there is no sound deadening left to this car other than the little bit of padding. Well, that one they ripped off. that one's still sort of there. But other than that, there's nothing, guys. So let's get Kilmatting and get this guy soundproofed. All right, guys, this is 80 mil Kilmat, which is, you know, not overly thick, but to do the job. And each box is 36 square feet. So I'll be sure to let you know what the overall quantity ends up being when I get full coverage here. So, got the car completely Kilmatted. I was actually taking a peek up at the headliner when I was done, and it actually still has the original sound deadener up there, and it is mint, so I am leaving it. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, guys. But everything else has been Kilmatted, and you can see I did things like the sheet metal from the back side, so kind of wherever I could sneak my hand in through some of the openings, just to reduce any type of reverberation, vibration, and noise, whatever it might be when you're traveling down the road. And we got everything front to back. If you guys are curious, that is almost 3 boxes of 80 mil Kilmat, 36 square feet per box. So if we did 36 and 36, that's 72. So let's call it about 100 square feet, probably when everything is said and done, because you got to remember, I still need to take off the door panels, and then we'll be doing a little bit there. And there might be a few places that I either forgot or that I might want to add a little bit more. Maybe once I'm putting in the rear plastics, I just didn't want to block any screw holes or anything that was obvious. A little tip that I want to share with you guys is that when you're putting this stuff down, number one, you really want to make sure, and there's rollers that you can buy that can help like really roll it and get it into all of the contours and everything else, sort of like here. And there are a bunch in the floor pan here. There's a couple layers of this stuff, and I'm still going to go around and push it down some more. But what I really want to stress and reiterate is down along here, don't make a seam right along here. Your first layer, take it and roll it up onto your rocker panel. Okay, so that it's like here, all the way across. And then after that, you can overlap coming down. And the reason for that is that if you do get water inside the car, you don't want a crack, or you don't want it to be able to kind of get down where it shouldn't be and create itself a little moisture pocket. Is ultimately at that point you could end up with some rust or some corrosion. Speaking of rust and corrosion, if you guys have rust on your floorboards, don't go just sticking this stuff down. You need to treat that rust with something, whether you're putting some sort of rust converter, POR 15, you're sandblasting it, you're cutting it out, welding fresh metal in, whatever it is. Don't allow existing rust to get covered up by this, and allow for a little ecosystem of potentially, you know, continuing to allow that rust to grow, because at that point your floorboard will just be held together with Kilmat. So note to self there, guys, okay? Get rid of any rust if you have any. Make sure you don't have seams that are going to allow water or moisture or anything, and make sure you roll and really push this stuff down into the grooves to make sure that you don't have air pockets or voids or any of that type of stuff in your Kilmat. So that's going to be it for me working on this today. Probably not the end of the video. Heater core showed up at my house to get the heater box all back together, and everything is cleaned and prepped and prettied up. The hardware is painted, and redid the little through firewall piece there, so that's all nice and freshly coated up with some vinyl trim paint And flexible paint is, I guess, the most important thing, is that is flexible material. And that should allow us to get that heater box installed in there, and we can get to the dash frame, dash harness, and everything else. So stay tuned. Maybe I'll just start taking some parts off the front side of the motor here. And, you know, because we're going to be upgrading to 3G alternator anyways, so we can pull this old alternator off. Maybe this would be a good donor to the Foxbody car. I think I've got some alternators kicking around. Pollution pump, that's going to come off and stay off. So we'll pretty much clean up stuff that's going on over here and start focusing on all of this stuff up in here. All right, so I got all the bolts holding the blower off, except for one, hiding back down in there, which I need one of these. But I need to actually cut this down so I can actually fit it down and underneath this pipe here. So I don't have my cutoff wheel, so gonna have to save that job for tomorrow. Once we get that guy off, then we can loosen off these two off the AC bracket, and this whole guy will lift off. That'll give us access to everything else that we need to pretty much clean and fancy this block up. So stay tuned. Alrighty guys, I got the last one out. You can see I cut down just with a cutoff wheel and managed to get that in there with a wrench and get that out. So the last thing ultimately before we can pull the blower off is just disconnect these two bolts here going through the factory AC bracket, and then this whole unit should be able to come off. It's off, and it's a heavy unit. Don't get me wrong, that thing weighs a shit ton. But now we got everything exposed here. Everything looks nice and clean. I know the gaskets and the spacer, everything in here are relatively new. So I'm gonna go ahead and tape that up, make sure we don't drop anything down inside. And then we'll be able to get access to our valve covers and everything else. You can actually see here, right? A little bit of clearancing. So be able to get us in a position to get all that stuff off and paint up what we need to paint up to beautify this motor. Alright guys, next day over here, got some oil draining in a very dicey situation. Guys, don't do this where you balance stuff. This has already, you know, kicked me in the ass before when I think it was one of my Lightning motors, and I knocked the oil over. I guess I just insist on learning the hard way. Anyways, once the oil is out, gonna drop the pan off, water pump timing cover, and that way things can start getting prepped up. I've already cleaned up the block and everything else, but I just want to make sure that we get a new gasket in there. It'll give us the ability to paint the block up and the pan separately without getting paint on the gasket. The only thing that's not going to come off are the heads and the lower intake manifold. Lower intake was off when the heads went on, so I really don't see the point on having to pull that off again when there's no leaks, and it was done within reason, not too many miles to go. But one thing actually, I know some of you guys know this, but for those that don't, see the rubber here on the harmonic balancer and how it's like pushing itself out? Guys, these are notorious for doing this, and you know, it is on the back side, so sometimes it's a little challenging to look from the back here, but take a look here. If you got a weird vibration in your motor or anything else, or your crank pulley's wobbling doing one of these, chances are it's from your balancer. So you definitely want to get that addressed. So we will be getting a new one there. In other news, we got some goods in. Overnight parts from Waco, Texas, huge LMR box, and I've taken a lot of the stuff out already, just trying to do an inventory, get organized of things, all the new cables and hoses and everything else that we need there. Got a QA1 SN95 style sway bar, so that's going to get mounted up, which goes underneath your frame rails here. So we need to actually do that on Jerry's car as well. Up here, actually, I've bolted up the sway bar, well, loosely anyways. But yeah, you can see that these rubbers and everything are in line with the frame rail here, as opposed to where the factory mounts would be, which have been drilled off in this case and shaved off in that case. And here we go, a nice box here. This was like Christmas morning. All our Ride Tech Shockwave suspension has shown up. Air management isn't here yet. Once that shows up, then we'll be doing a full video on the air ride install in the car. So that's all pretty exciting, at least I think it is. So now going to drain out the rear of the oil pan, and then we'll start knocking all of this stuff off the motor, start cleaning and prepping and starting to paint. We think we have the theme that we want for the motor. We just need to do a couple more test panels to see colors of pulleys versus accessories, valve covers versus the blower itself, and then of course all of the fun piping for the blower. So stick around, lots to get done. So a little bit of progress, no real beautifying or anything else. It was more just breakdown and cleanup and scrubbing and degreasing. Thankfully, this motor was pretty clean to begin with. You can see a few other little, wherever you spray brake clean, guys, and it leaves some residue, that residue or dark, wet looking areas usually means oil or grease. So there's going to be a few little spots to clean up, and then we'll be able to mask everything off and get this block painted up. Started cleaning and prepping stuff all over here, trying to get organized more than anything. You obviously want to make sure keep your hardware associated with the parts that you've taken off. And I've actually busted out the old folding table here because, guys, the parts have just been starting to get out of control a little bit. So again, really important that you stay organized and tidy. It's not a shipbox Fox operation here by any means. I'm gonna wrap some stuff up here. I need some lunch. I need to go to the post office, ship out some of my infamous project swag, which you guys are always more than welcome to hit on my website. Got lots of t-shirt options and actually a lot of cool stuff in the pipeline that'll be probably unveiled at Foxtoberfest. So hopefully we'll see you guys there as well. But we'll be back at this. Stay tuned.